Finally, the rains have stopped. Supposed to have a couple of nice sunny days. Time to get to work. Misha here, and let's talk about the AUG. I'm a product of my time, of the 80s, and this was and still is one of the most unique and coolest firearms, and frankly, one of the handful of truly successful bullpups. And you're going to hear me say AUG. Again, product of my time, sorry. I know that AUG, the basically Universal Army Rifle, is probably the more accurate pronunciation. I apologize. I never say AT-AT. It's AT-AT. Been that way since the 80s. But, heck, we all break our own rules, right? So, do as I say, not as I do, I suppose. And fair warning, it's Friday, so there's going to be traffic, and there's actually a small light air show a couple of miles down the road. They've got a little grassy strip, so you're going to hear air traffic. I didn't just suddenly move under an air lane. Anyway, if you like this video, we'll do a few. We've talked about the AUG in the past. But this one, I really want to talk about the original Austrian Bundesheer STG77 in its variants, and my good old classic Steyr AUG SA, aka the civilian legal version here, in the classic mean green trim. How about that? Kind of talk about the early days and what have you, and some of the unique, cool features. After all, a few months ago, did a video kind of covering the FALs and looked at the Austrian's STG78 FAL, and I promised in that video it was about time to do an update of the AUG videos. And that's actually a good place to start because we have a very similar gentleman, Colonel Stoll. He oversaw the team that began development of this as early as 1968. At least that's the earliest drawings that I've been able to turn up. He didn't directly design it, but he was, the military coordinator. Yeah, Austria kind of saw what America was doing in Vietnam with the new 223, the M193, the 55 Grand round, and liked it. The whole lightweight, high velocity appealed. So that was the idea. We need to replace the still very good but aging FAL. So a team was set up. The lead designer was Horst Wesp, who would go on to work with Glock and help design one of my favorite guns, the Walther P99, and there on and so forth. But he wasn't alone. He had the two Carls, Karl Moser and Karl Wagner, helping him, as well as many others. Again, it was a team effort, and rightfully so. This was a universal rifle with a lot of design goals, and it was designed from the outset using cutting-edge technology. Not surprising from the nation that developed the Glock. And of course, these Preban guns, mine is a Interarms. There was also Gun South, we'll talk about both, are not common today. And a lot of folks don't like to shoot theirs. I'm gonna start off with the original mag and Phoenix ammo. Just a few rounds, considering this gun's status. And it did hold open, but obviously no release on the original. I fortunately am not one of those people. And of course, from the get-go, they used their own translucent mags, yet another thing. A lot of benefits here. Lightweight, easy to produce once you get the molds going. You could check your ammunition. And what's really cool, you can interchange the original mags from, say, 1980 with ones made in 2025 if you wanted. And I know owners worry about wear on the receiver here You see it on mine. From the charging handle moving. It is non-reciprocating, of course. But it still does wear the paint type finish off the aluminum alloy. And another wear spot back here on the polymer. It's basically glass reinforced nylon. The casings come out, and since there's not really a brass deflector as such, they bounce off the stock here and go where they need to go. With steel cased ammo, it'll really knock your stock off real quick, but even brass case, it will mar it. But I honestly don't care. Those are just signs the gun has been loved and enjoyed, and you know my attitude. I want to do that. That's the point of owning. That said, I always do seek out guns that are not unfired in the box. I try to find guns in, 90+% condition with all the accessories, but the box, shoot, it's just one more thing to keep track of and lose, right? Okay, back to the history. 68, you get your earliest drawings. Austrian government, the Bundesheer, it knows it needs something new, but it's nothing going on yet. So this is pretty much a Steyr project. The period up to about 1973-74 is the concept phase, sketching things out, developing materials, kind of doing features. One interesting thing from these early days, you don't have the integrated optic. There's still an iron sight gun at this point. By 75, 76, you're getting into the advanced prototypes, maybe small pre-production batch phase, and this is when the Bundesheer, the Austrian government, has laid out specs and trials testing go from that point, 76 to 77. Basically, they wanted, a universal army rifle, one that was modular, easy to use, easy to control in either single shot or full auto, lightweight, easy to maintain, really just going with the newest and greatest. And that actually explains the heavy use of polymer in this. And the receiver as such, including the mount for the optic, is an aluminum alloy with steel inserts where necessary. Uses Steyr's cold hammer forged chrome lined barrels. They settled on the 1 in 9 twist. Keep in mind this was actually adopted before M885 was officially adopted, but they knew it was coming. Nevertheless, they felt the 1 in 9 was the good optimal in between. It'll stabilize both 55 grain and 62 grain. This is something that other nations have also learned, like Poland and France. Of course, a threaded muzzle. These were 13 millimeter left hand, kind of borrowing from the FAL. Mag in here. And they were getting close to being ambidextrous, or at least lefty friendly, which is, hey, for a Germanic nation, that's an improvement. You have a left side ejection port, because if you tried to shoot it lefty this way, it would not work. You would literally have brass in your face. It's hard enough being right-handed without the deflector. So we do have this port here. The negative is you did have to get a left-handed bolt. The positive is an armor could swap those out. So, compared to newer guns, okay, it's a little chunky, but back then it was fine. The cross-bolt style safety could be actuated by either hand. It had the rather famous progressive trigger, where a short pull was single shot and then a full back was full auto. Some loved it, some hated it. What do you do? Large trigger guard for use with winter gloves, mitts. And of course we have the folding front handle, spring loaded. Basically you'd fold it up either for storage, transport, or if you wanted to kind of lay it on a barrier, something like that. There you go. Fixed front sling swivel. It does rotate all the way. You have a ambidextrous, as it were, release for the magazine. Some argue that it's equally uncomfortable for both-handed people. But your charging handle, this is the original style, the square shape, it was only on the left. Although it did have right here a push button to be a forward assist, so that's pretty cool. As I said earlier, the first versions had iron sights. This one will actually keep them. They're on top of your optic, here and here. It's just fixed backups. But your main optic, which, yeah, in theory could be double the carry handle, was a 1.5 times magnified Swarovski with the donut of death in there, where basically a man would fill up the ring at about 300 meters, and you could judge from there. They would introduce dots and crosshairs to go in the dot and in the donut later on, but this is part of the casting, which over in Austria, not a big deal. This isn't really considered more or less a component than anything else, but in America, this would be the quote-unquote receiver. Yeah, it kind of gives you some limitations there. Of course, it's adjustable and all that fun stuff. And it did even have, somehow, storage in the butt trap here. But we'll get to that when we get to disassembly. Sling was basically an update of the American style with the buckle here. We see this quite a bit. Green. Green was chosen basically because it was just the best for where the Bundesheer was working, middle of Europe. At this point, you know, Austria's position during the Cold War, especially early on, was quite fascinating. I suggest you check it out. And then the barrel, we'll get there too, but while this is the 508 millimeter version with the original tulip flash hider, from the get-go, Steyr was planning to do a carbine version, maybe even an SMG version, and an LMG, an H-bar version. The modularity, and a lot of that lies with the barrel. Anyway, testing and trials. This one up against the STG78 is kind of a control, a standard. You know, look at what we've got now before we go to something new, in case it's not any better. They also looked at the handful of other 223 offerings at the time. I couldn't find any evidence that they tried out the HK33, but it's possible they did. They did definitely try out the Belgian FNCAL, the CAL, which is the immediate predecessor of the FNC. They tried out, of course, the Colt M16A1. By this point, it's very well developed. And interestingly, I guess to kind of give a little flavor from the other side, they tried out the Czechoslovakian VZ58 and 7.62x39. Interesting choice, but another one of my favorite guns. And Steyr's new AUG, see I said it right that time, went up against those, and what'd they find out? Essentially, even though they selected the Bullpup layout, which, you know, this wasn't the first, but it was the first to really be successful. You know, very famously, Britain tried the EM2, the infield Bullpup in 1951, and actually adopted it, but that was reversed before it could go anywhere. And Russia had played around with a handful of Bullpups. It wasn't an unknown thing, but it never really made it very far. Of course, at the exact same time, France was working and would soon introduce the FAMAS, but this would beat it by 1 year or even less. It's possible the FAMAS could have beat it, but the French kind of slowed things down. This thing here and there, almost exactly the same time. And of course, that was picked to save on length, and the polymer and alloys were picked to save on weight. So it was pretty light, pretty compact for what it was. We'll get to the specs in just a minute. They found that it was as accurate, or even maybe more so, than the competition during the trials. Definitely as dependable, reliable. Again, maybe even more so. It was effective to purchase, basically. Cost effective. Easy to maintain on the unit armor level. Very modular. It had what they wanted. Therefore, it was adopted as the Sturmgewehr 77, STG77, being officially adopted in 1978, but since the final version here was made in 1977, that's where the name comes from. And by 1979, they start appearing in the hands of the troops. And really by 1982, Steyr had produced enough of these that the STG78 could be retired from frontline use and kind of shifted over for training and reserve auxiliary, put in stockpiles for a number of years. With this being the thing. And for export, this was known as the AUG, the AUG A1. And again, the semi-automatic version we got in America was the AUG SA. And now let's try it with a modern mag. Since we have no release, we've got to do this. I'm actually impressed how well the Phoenix is doing out of bullpups. Held open again. As you can see, it works fine with current production, or at least reasonably current. I've had this mag a few years, but really there's not a ton of difference. Slightly different color, translucent polymer, and the original mags to me have more of a smooth texture versus this being a little more. And they are date coded, but really it's the same mag, which is pretty neat. Why didn't they go to M16 AR-15 mags? Pretty easy. There's no reason. It was not the NATO standard at the time at all. Plus, the AR mag had its own issues and alloys. Stick to a mag kind of made out of the same polymer as your rifle. It has some benefits. It's light. And like I said, yeah, getting the molds and everything set up at the factory to make these mags cost several tens of thousands of dollars. But once you got them, you can pretty much squirt these out cheap and effective. They're extremely light and flexible. I keep mine in a few different style pouches, including an East German raindrop camo one here because, I don't know, why not? Kind of seems fitting. Never really have had a original Austrian pouch from the late 70s, early 80s. If you have, let me know in the comments. Of course, holds open on the last round. I still don't hate the trigger. So with this barrel, the 20-inch herein, we have an overall length of about 31 inches, give or take. And we have a weight, including the optic, empty, of about 7.5 pounds, maybe just a little bit more. So for a 20-inch gun, and this is not a light barrel, it's not super heavy, but it's not light either, with an optic attached, that's not bad at all for this era. And everything you got is right here. Of course, a 16-inch barrel, just over 400 millimeters, would very soon be on offer for carbine use. And a 24-inch barrel would be on offer, along with a complete LMG conversion kit that we'll talk about in a different video. And there would even be a sub-carbine or even SMG barrel that originally was about 13.8 inches, although it would fluctuate in newer times down to as short as 12.5 and as high as 14.5. And that kind of fun stuff. Of course, the optic would change quite a bit too. So that's the military version that was in Bundesheer service really through today. What about the Interarms here, my 901 block gun? They were the first company to import semi-automatic AUGs to America. They sought out ATF approval in the very early 80s, and it was granted. It helped that it was a closed bolt design. Nevertheless, a lot of small changes had to be made to the receiver and bolt group and stock. So these did not appear on the market till about 1983. Most of them are at least 83 dated as far as a manufacturing code on like the barrel, although probably a lot of them weren't sold here to 84. And the Interarms guns kind of continued through at least 85. Now, one thing that gets brought up, of course, is price point. And it's really hard to nail it down because this is well before the internet era, so these are specialty guns. Not many came in. Dealers could pretty much charge what they wanted or order them in, but a couple of prices I've found put it in the mid to upper sevens, say $789 around 1985. And when you convert that, well, you're looking at a price point of between $2,300 and $2,400 in today's money. Not cheap. Although you did get an optic and either 2 or 3 mags. Sources vary, probably just the batch and everything. You did also get a sling, a cleaning kit, scope caps or covers, scope adjustment tool, and usually an end cap for the barrel, the muzzle. And they shipped in a cardboard box, although there was a pretty fancy hard tactical case that could be purchased, usually as a kit. And they even offered, in an additional fee, a left-handed bolt from pretty early on. They also offered additional 20-inch barrel assemblies early on, although variations would take a little while to get here. And you could buy the standard capacity 30-shot mags, spares. So they were supported. But Interarms was not the major offerer of the AUG in the 80s. That would actually be Gun South. They would take over from Interarms in either late 85 or 86. They were definitely doing it by 87. And really in one version or another would import these through 1998, although there would be some major difficulties along the way. The majority of your prebans are probably Gun South marked, but not overwhelmingly so, because it was still pretty small numbers, frankly. How many for each one exactly? We don't know. Things get a little more complicated. I can't say we can go by blocks a little bit. Like I said, this is a 901. That seems to be the original block. Mine's a 220 0. So 3 digits. You have the block and then SA in 3 digits. So presumably each block was 999 guns. Call it 1,000. They would do 901s, and Interarms would definitely get into the 902 block. Now, confirmed serials don't tell us a full story. If we were to go by that, we go up to about 901 400 and then 902 100. So at least 500 Interarms did, but more likely it was just over 1,000, maybe 11, maybe 12, maybe 1,300 in that range for them. When Gun South came in, they started, as far as I know, with the 903 block. There may be some 902 Gun Souths, but I've never heard of one. If you have, let me know in the comments. And they would definitely keep on through 904 and 905 blocks. And it seems like they were just getting into the 906 block when, well, things came crashing down in March of 1989. And we get really hard-pressed to know exactly how many they did. It seems like their first import batch was roughly 1,700. And their second batch was roughly 3,000. Did all make it over before the ban? Possibly. Best estimate I've seen, and it's really just a guesstimate estimate of the two put together, is 6,000 guns, give or take. With certainly 1,500 or less, maybe as few as 1,000, being Interarms, and then therefore the bulk being Gun South. Although the Gun South guns did have some product improvements that Steyr carried over from the automatic version to the semi-automatic. So, you know, I'm not saying one's better than the other. I wanted it in Interarms because it has early features like the open-ended tulip and the original bolt group, all that stuff. Even the optic changed just a little bit late on. And that's because that's what was adopted as the STG77. Alright, with that, let's peek inside. You've seen inside an AUG, but you may not have seen inside mine. And this very easily disassembles into 6 components. Push this down. I usually find pushing the cross pin out's a little easier. You got this here. You just press it out and it kind of starts to disassemble itself. So here's our receiver and barrel set. And here's the famous QD. Of course, you got to pull your handle back, otherwise you cannot push the latch, and then this simply pops out. Our barrel here, like I said, it's a medium heavy. It's not light. I love the kind of rings here on it. We have a 3-position gas regulator, essentially standard, adverse, and then shut off for grenade launching. Pin holds this in. You've got a check nut on here, and then of course this is where it latches into the receiver casting. Set that down. Here's our casting here. This is very light, just really using steel only where they need it. Our charging handle, you can notice how it locks in up front. That helps retain the barrel, although our spring-loaded catch is our main deal. Has a paint type finish, or anodizing I should say. Here's the rear. You can see where the rods go. It's really cool and all, and in Austria it doesn't matter, as we'll see with later updates about this, but since this is the serialized part of the gun, and since your optic is part of it, if your optic gets damaged or goes foggy, there is not a whole lot you can do. I mean, you can, I guess, go in, disassemble it, or you could just use your backup iron sights. It's one of the few areas that I would say was definitely a serious shortcoming early on. Next up, we have our bolt group. Here we go. And this is a short stroke gas piston system. Little tiny piston up where the regulator's at. And then the second rod is used by the charging handle. Of course, the 2 rods thing. And it's neat because the bolt here is always pushed in the forward position, which makes reassembly so much easier than if it flopped around. It's just kind of part of how it is. Now, here's one area, since we got it apart. Steyr would have basically an internal product improvement program that started in the 80s. This one doesn't have it. The original military guns did neither, and the Interarms imports didn't have it. I think maybe even the earliest Gun South didn't, but around the time Gun South took over, they added a roller back here. This really only was for full auto, but it just kind of got carried over to the semi. Why not? And it just reduced friction, reduced bounce. It just made things smoother, easier, more reliable. Likewise, they would also go to an improved firing pin. And they would actually sell updated firing pins as a kit if you wanted to do that. For what it's worth, the bolt group, the barrel, and the receiver were the 3 main serialized parts on a Preban AUG. Next step, we want to take our butt plate off. You press in this little indent here to pull your grenade pin off your rear sling swivel. Then your rubber, it's very thin, but it is rubber, butt plate comes off. Notice too, the early ones were green, and you have metal here, and it is hard backed for the most part. And getting back here, this is your cleaning kit door. It's kind of kept inside here. This one has probably not been off in a while. You can see small pull-through brushes, even a small oil bottle inside, and it's just covered by this little plate back here. Pretty standard feature. It's amazing they found that much space back here. And then finally we come to the fire control group. A very cool, very neat little pack. Of course, it's a bullpup, so it impinges back here for releasing your hammer. The hammer is reinforced polymer, as is this. This is part of the takedown. The bolt hold open, for rather obvious reasons, since it's interacting with metal parts. It is metal, but overall, this would be very easy for a unit armor to swap out and repair, replace later. It's held together with pins. The whole thing essentially disassembles into half a dozen core components, and each one is light and handy and very easy to replace. Notice there's no springs shooting anywhere. That's all housed internally. Just a floppy trigger here. What have you. You know, this is a classic 20-incher, but I think it's actually lighter than the A3 with the 16-inch just because of the different optic and receiver spec. Brass ejection right in my face. Wear shooting glasses, kids. Take it from me. Reassembly, just as easy as disassembly, which is important. No small parts to lose in the field. Really no tools needed. Just put your fire control boot back in. You might have to jiggle it just a bit. And then your butt plate goes back on just as you'd expect. Press in and pull your pin back. Make sure it clicks in good. And then you can put back your casting and stuff. Here you can see the interaction between the receiver and the bolt. How they rebound, the rods work. And then of course that just slides back in. Make sure your cross pin hasn't decided to go back in. I've never done that before. You live, you learn. Without the barrel end, this is a very light little unit. Got the bolt held back, as you can see with the handle. This is your old school forward assist. You can see it's locked to the carrier. No release, but it's not a big deal to just run it, and there you go. And then of course, you can actually lock your handle in a little notch back here, similar to the way like you see on an HK. And that just makes reinstalling the barrel if you need to do it this way. You can also install it the other direction, but let it go. And now it's locked in, so you can't release it with this handle forward. Just a little extra assurance. And it's remarkable, considering how easy this comes apart, that this really does return to zero. Not even just a little bit, but it because it is serial matched with all this, it seems to work very well together. And again, I really don't hate the trigger. And I would say the three-prong, open-ended device on the original, the A1, the SA, is probably a good flash hider. But I would say the modern tulip style is probably a little bit better at muzzle. Recoil timing. What do you think? And again, held open and working great with that Phoenix. Brass case always seems to do better in bullpups anyway. A couple other changes we saw on the Gun South run. Another major one was the switch from the open to the closed front tulip flash hider, which actually does make a lot of sense. It was a better design. It was more rigid. You didn't have prongs sticking out. They could theoretically catch things. I know that not as much of a likelihood of getting vines and foliage in here in Central Europe as, say, the jungles, but these were meeting with export success. It was also just stronger, though, not peeling back. Notice it is internal threaded for a blank fire device. Somehow I think Steyr had something to do with that. And you also notice that there's no bayonet lug. Now, what was really cool about the Interarms and Gun South Preban imports is, even though they changed dimensions of a few things, like the stock internals and the bolt group so that full auto parts could not be put in, they kept all the features. Magazines, furniture, threading. So you might be wondering, what about a bayonet lug? Is that missing? No. And that doesn't surprise me, because the STG78, their FAL, did not utilize a bayonet. But in 1977-78, they did experiment with the ability to put a bayonet on, including the Glock 81 field knife. the end cap was meant where you could take it off and put on a lug adapter, although this was never really fielded. But when they started exporting these, they did offer a clamp-on lug that actually just kind of went in the middle of the barrel and used these rings, multiple of them, to kind of just latch on. I've had those before, although I never wanted to put one on my gun because it would mar it up, and you do have to pull off your flash hider to do it. And it was essentially a Stanag lug, and used by a few nations, namely Australia. They rather famously would switch from the L1A1 made at Lithgow FAL to this, adopting it as the Steyr F88 based on the A1, but it had a 1-in-7 twist versus 1-in-9, and it had a Stanag lug here. And you might wonder, what bayonet did they use? See, this is why I picked this up a while back. It just comes in handy for so many videos. The Icorn KCB77, kind of the standard European bayonet for a while there. They marketed this, and still say it today, is compatible with the AUG, and it would work with the lug. Several nations did use it, including at least some in Australia. I believe Ireland used some. The lug would basically just be here, and it would mount here. To be fair, Australia did try out the Buck 188 bayonet, the M9, in the very early 90s, but it wasn't successful. In the end, what they went with was a version of the M7 made for Australia. Told you there'd be traffic. Made by General Cutlery in America in the mid-90s. It goes to show you, they pretty much had three different styles that they had some use of. But the Australian military did issue quite a few bayonets for the F88 and later versions, but the Austrian, while they tried around with it, never really seemed to, out of maybe like special forces, special needs, as far as I'm aware. If you know differently, let me know. Other major users, like I said, Ireland, New Zealand, Malaysia, Indonesia had some. It's a pretty long list, and it would get even longer after the Cold War. In fact, we get to the point where nearly 36 nations had some of these. In fact, in 1987, Gun South imported an uncertain number of guns for U.S. Border Control, U.S. Customs, and they would utilize those for a number of years, so some American use. And Gun South would actually bring over quite a wide range in models and variants utilizing the modular design, at least compared to what Interarms did, because this is really the only model that Interarms ever imported. So while that's cool, unfortunately, they really didn't start appearing until 1988. And then, yeah, March of 1989, the executive order, the crime thing from Bush, added to the 68 Gun Control Act, effectively banning guns, and things like the AUG were prime targets. We'll see that the U.S. government has always had kind of a thing against the AUG. I think it's the diehard thing. We just don't see them. One cool option was the so-called special receiver, the SR, which got rid of the fixed optic and went to, it wasn't a 1913 rail. This was well before that was a standard, but it was at least a rail mount system of sorts. You also started to see black guns, especially with the shorter 16-inch carbine barrel. I don't believe the Interarms ever did carbines, and I do not have a 80s carbine barrel. But again, since parts were interchangeable from old to new, here's the barrel out of my A3. Notice it goes in with no resistance, whatsoever. And just to show that the bolt goes home, no problems. This makes the gun well under 7.5 pounds, about 7.25, and about 27, 28 inches long. And this in all black was often known as the police carbine version, because of course that made more sense. And Austrian police would use the Steyr AUG as well. Unfortunately, yeah, not many of the black 16-inchers came in. Ditto for the 24-inch H-bars. They actually might have appeared slightly earlier as a conversion kit with the heavy barrel, with bipod, and the extended magazine. There even seems to be a little bit of evidence of a factory 24-inch Bullpups being sold, although that's a little bit harder to nail down. And it doesn't seem like many, if any, of the 9mm para conversion kits made it in before the 89 ban or full complete 9mm guns. Keep in mind, the 9mm version wasn't even adopted by Austrian police as the MP88 until, well, 1988, and really it wasn't until 1990 that Steyr got big on those, but that's again for another video. So, where did that leave Gun South in the 1990s? I'm very pleased the Phoenix runs fine in bullpups like this. Immediately after the new rules came through, essentially 1,200 guns were caught in customs and confiscated. Then they were ordered released by a judge, and then things went back and forth. It's hard to say. I said earlier that they did 1,700 guns in their first batch, and then they had at least import approval for another 3,000 guns. I don't know if the next 1,200 were in addition to those, or were part of those, and I don't know how many got released successfully, and if so, to what market. We do know that by 1990, Gun South was really advertising, especially the 16-inch version of the AUG, now in probably the 906 block, to police customers. So these might have been restricted just to that. Who's to say how many may or may not have made it into civilian hands because of the way things were back then. We do see also a price point. There are a couple of ads with them advertising the 16-inch police carbine package for $1,380. And once you adjust that for inflation for 2025, that's $3,420. So $420, go for it. My point to bring these numbers up, they weren't cheap. Now, I know that when TFB did a video interviewing Steyr, they said that the Steyr was $500-600 in the 80s. Maybe, not in my neck of the woods, but even if you call it $600, let's say, that's still about $1,650 in today's money. So less by, say, 1987, 88 standards, but still. These were never cheap. To be fair, in 1988, Century Arms actually imported a couple of hundred FAMASas. They were essentially the same money, maybe even a little more, but people went for the AUG because A, it was more recognizable, B, you got an optic, C, it usually came with more mags. The FAMAS for the money just didn't seem like the better value bullpup. This is actually why there are so few semi-automatic FAMASas in America, at least pre-ban. They didn't sell very well. The AUG did, though, at least, to a certain niche. This kind of collectability is going up by this point. And Gun South would continue importing for the police market through the 90s. But in 1997, we get the USR, the USR. Universal Sporting Rifle. They had to change the name because the AUG SA was actually banned by name in the 1989 works. And of course, it also addressed all kinds of features. The AUG didn't have a folding stock. It didn't have a bayonet lug, but it was just too scary. And one thing that the 89 works didn't really mess with, magazine well. And so that helped them out. So what they ended up doing, they gave it a non-threatening barrel. And interestingly, these were imported from Austria. They were still Steyr made. But the barrels were actually Australian made, ADI. They were 20-inch heavy barrels, sporter barrels. They were still adjustable, but they took away the GR grenade settings, so just two positions. Okay. And they removed the release catch here. Okay. And of course they weren't threaded, no flash hider, nothing like that. So that's not good. They also had to modify the stock. For one, they went from a threatening green or black to a apparently not threatening gray. We see this with other makers too. HK's done it. And they added a weird thumbhole stock web back here. Yeah, to make a Bullpup stock thumbhole is the whole thing, but yeah, they changed this up. So that all sounds kind of crummy. And it was. But they were still able to take standard mags, even though they shipped with a 10-rounder, because part of the 94 assault weapons ban, totally different from the 89 thing, was you couldn't have mags made after September, so that's what they did. But it had the new A2 receiver. This is why collectors kind of wanted them. For one, it has the updated folding charging handle. There would actually be a couple of versions of this too, the early version and the late. And the late was meant to help prevent cracking and other things. But the A2 charging handle integrated the forward assist in a more natural way and could fold to the side to get out of the way. It was better. And they went away from the fixed optic to a removable optic. Essentially, it was on a proprietary rail. You used a bullet tip, it would slide off, and you could either slide on a different optic, maybe a 3-power, or just a replacement, or you could put on a Weaver rail adapter, later Picatinny rail adapter. Cool. So that's where the USR really gained, was having essentially a development of the special receiver from the 1980s, but more compatible and so on and so forth. And some of these updates would be carried over to military users, but the A2 was kind of a transitional thing. It really didn't appear till 97, along with the USR, and within a decade it would be supplanted by the A3. It's getting ahead of ourselves. But what happened to the USR? Well, April 1998, this time the Clinton administration expanded upon what the Bush administration did in 89, which itself expanded upon the 68 Gun Control Act, and essentially banned these. Part of it was by name again, but another part was the magwell. They added the ability to take evil mags, double stack, mags over 10 rounds to the list of features for imports that just were not allowed. So it got axed. And this was really the last version that Gun South attempted to import. They did manage to get like 3,000 in under a year. So that added to the roughly 6,000 pre-bans, meaning, 9,000-ish came over. Cool. But 98, 99, that would be the end of Gun South's involvement with Steyr. I don't blame them. You do see a few mag imports and other small parts on and off, but in 98, because we're in the deepest, darkest depths of the assault weapons ban, such guns just aren't popular because you can't have full features and there's a lot of restrictions, and it's just not a good time. And again, they've tried twice, they got banned twice. I don't blame them for giving up. It's actually remarkable they tried again a decade later. Alright, last mag of the day out of the old one. Yeah, she still runs. As you can see, held open successfully. One way to release it though is, of course, eject your mag. And with that, that's really the story of the original Sturmgewehr 77, along with just a mention of the Steyr F88. By the way, the carbine version of the F88 was called the F88C. And the pre-ban guns, the AUG SAs, with a little bit on the USR there. And my old rifle ran great. Always does. It's a lot of fun to shoot. Next time, if you're interested, we'll talk about the later updates and service versions like the STG77 A1 mod and the STG77 A2 Commando, and so on and so forth, and the police versions, and kind of how we got to today's modern AUG A3 M2 and where all that leads. I also figure we'll do a video looking at the 9mm kits again, because there's been a lot of recent talk about those. Anyway, if you have more information on Preban AUG serials, please let me know in the comments, because it's not easy to find. Heck, I can't even tell you for sure just how many STG77s the Bundesheer has bought over the years. A lot of these numbers are just not clear. But this has been a success for Steyr, and it's one of the guns of that era. They continued on, and Steyr is one of those companies that really survived the Cold War period. A lot of them went out of business or had to be bought out or renamed. Steyr fared better than most, and I think that's pretty cool. But let me know what you think if you own one, or if you have one of the rare late 88 or early 89 Gun South imports, because they're out there. I've always been happy with mine here. It's always worked well, even if it doesn't have the later updates. But then again, I've also been very happy with the newer, like, A3s we got. That's a story for another day, as I said. And if you notice, I didn't mention AR-15 mags or NATO stocks. No, back in this era, they were just all Steyr mags all the time. The NATO stock would be a much, much later advent. Yeah, it's getting warm today. Started off really nice and cool out, but welcome to early fall in Arkansas. As always, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to help support us, check out the link to Patreon, or you can do a super thanks here on YouTube. With that, I'm going to head in, feed Miss Peanut, and maybe feed myself a wee bit. Appreciate you tuning in. This is Misha. We'll catch you very soon next time.